I would like to express my deepest gratitude to the Institute of Arts and Sciences for giving me the privilege to deliver the third Alejandro Roces Professorial Lecture in honor of its alumnus and former professor and dean, Dr. Alejandro Roces Roces. It is also auspicious for me to give this presentation on the 93rd Foundation Week anniversary of the Far Eastern University. From one green university to another, indeed, I'm truly honored. My lecture today is entitled Parties, Movements, and Philippine Democracy Against the Odds. The Philippines is Southeast Asia's oldest democracy. Yet, the country's democratic system has often been called a democracy with adjectives. It has been labeled elitist, cacique, imperfect, delegative, illiberal, clientelistic, contested, and oligarchical. These adjectives collectively point to a diminished subtype of democracy, a defective democracy. Felipe Miranda, one of the country's foremost political scientists, pointedly asserted, if given a generous time frame of 50 years, a regime fails to initiate and make viable the processes and institutions that modern democracies must develop to endure. If most of its citizenry are unable to live human lives, then there is a good chance that it is not democratic or truly interested in democratizing. In the Asia-Pacific, countries at middle range of development, like the Philippines, sometimes embraced democracy and sometimes embraced autocracy. Hence, our primary question is why the Philippines still considers itself democratic despite the persistent poverty, gross inequality, and lack of economic opportunity. It is a compelling puzzle first identified by Nancy Bermeo and Deborah Yashar in 2016 as the resilience of poor democracies, which are electorally competitive regimes where many or most of the inhabitants are poor and where moderating middling men are proportionally few. They call these countries democracies against the odds. Robert Dahl introduced the concept of a polyarchy as an alternative to the word democracy to maintain the distinction between democracy as an ideal system and the institutional arrangement that have come to be regarded as a kind of imperfect approximation of an ideal and experience shows. The figure here compares the Asian countries ranked in the Additive Polyarchy Index in 1986 and 2019. The year 1986 is significant since it marked the beginning of the third wave of democratization in Asia, with the historic people power uprising in the Philippines that ended the 20-year rule of the dictator Ferdinand Marcos. The Additive Polyarchy Index, or API, is one of the measures developed by the varieties of democracies, the largest global dataset on democracy with some 27 million data points for 202 countries from 1789 to 2019. As can be observed in the figure, majority of Asian countries have made tremendous strides in their polyarchy scores since 1986. The countries have maintained their democratic credentials despite the tumultuous decades marked by the war on terror, two financial crises, and domestic political unrest. South Korea and Taiwan are noteworthy for their top scores, while India seems to have stagnated. Japan is the only Asian country that has achieved the status of a consolidated liberal democracy. The score of Thailand, one of the Asian third-wave democratizers, has suffered considerably as a result of its series of unrests and coups that restored military domination in Thai politics. The same can be said about Myanmar. Hence, most of the countries in this chart are those that have managed to maintain their democratic credentials against the odds. Another important aspect of interrogating democratizing Asia is to assess the level of party institutionalization in the region. The institutionalization of political parties and political party systems has been considered as the integral part of the democratization process, especially in the so-called new democracies. Party institutionalization refers to the process of acquiring the properties of a durable organization, which is valued in its own right, and gaining the perceptions of others that it is such. VDEM has also developed a Party Institutionalization Index, an additive index that measures the scope and depth of party institutionalization in a country every year. Scope is measured by the proportion of parties that reach a threshold of minimal institutionalization, while linkages party established with the masses and the elites define the depth. Ironically, the Philippines, which has the longest historical experience in party politics in Southeast Asia, with its first political party founded in 1900, has performed poorly since its inception and links this to the fact that the leading parties in the Philippines were not the fruit of a successful, broad-based nationalist movement, but of an elite accommodation between large landowners and the U.S. colonial powers. The paradox of Philippine politics is that despite the long tradition of institutionalized democratic practices and history of popular struggles, Philippine society has engendered an elitist, clientelistic democracy embedded in an underdeveloped economy. Social movements and political parties are two distinct organizational vehicles for collective political action. Each operate within its space in the state-society continuum. Social movements are largely active within society, while political parties essentially contest power within the state. Social movements and political parties have generally been regarded as separate, but they are in fact deeply associated within the spectrum. Social movements often shape electoral competition and party politics. New parties can also be created from social movements. Parties can evolve into mass-based social movements. Electoral democracy in many countries is itself the result of actions of social movements. According to Charles Tilly, social movements seek to launch a challenge against the people in our society who hold power. Social movements are essentially challengers, seeking access and making claims to the institutionalized realm of politics. They are the outsiders. While political parties are already polity members who have such routinized access, they are the insiders. Despite over a century of party politics, a history of four-party systems, and a multitude of parties, the Philippines still suffers from a seeming lack of institutionalized parties. Since 1987, a number of parties and coalitions were organized and dissolved in successive local and national elections. The absence of strong, credible political parties continues to be a democratic deficit in the Philippine political system. I assert that Philippine elections have historically functioned as a dual platform for elite politics and popular participation. This assertion is based on a state-in-society perspective. In this view, societies affect states as much as, or possibly more than, states affect societies. Based on the VDEM dataset, there has been a consistent historical gap between politics from above, or elite politics through election, and politics from below, or popular participation through mass movements. The interactions of state and society are mutually transforming, and the clashes of state and social forces are mediated through the struggles and accommodations in the numerous arenas to be found in society. There have been 4 contingent configurations that have played out in critical historical junctures. First, strong political elites faced with weak popular participation breed dynastic politics. Second, weak political elites coupled with weak mass movements fuel populist and celebrity politics. Third, strong popular participation amidst weakened political elites allow for the mainstreaming of social movements with reform agenda. Fourth, strong political elites faced with strong mass movement may open the pathway for new and emerging elites. In the Philippines, clans, not parties, have been the building blocks of politics. Through the years, the adaptive strategies of the political clans have mirrored the country's shifting contours within the socio-economic and political terrain. More than the seemingly immutable and unequal socio-economic structure, continuing clan dominance is both the reason for as well as a product of the failure to develop a truly democratic electoral and party system. Historically, a total of 319 political clans have controlled local and national politics. Of the total 319 political families, 111 or 35% are considered durable or have been active since the colonial and post-war period. 124 or 39% of the dominant political families have emerged in the last 4 decades. 50 or 16% are dormant political families that used to be dominant but suffered some electoral or political setbacks but still possess the machinery to make a comeback. 34 or 10% are defunct or have completely disappeared from the political arena. According to the study of the Ateneo School of Government, 70% of the local government officials will be dynastic by 2040. From a comparative perspective, the normal rate of political dynasties elected is between 5 to 10%. We claim to be a democracy. We regularly hold elections. But if 70 to 80% of all elective positions in government are dominated by political dynasties, whose interests do they represent? Public office is a public trust. It should not be treated as a family heirloom. Okay. The inability to institutionalize much-needed electoral reforms have resulted in a phenomenon of the election of entertainment personalities, movie stars, TV celebrities, and sports heroes into local and national offices. Given the voters' general frustration with traditional politics, they have turned their attention to simple messages and uncomplicated images. Continued poverty and underdevelopment, coupled with the growing influence of mass and social media, have contributed to the emergence of celebrity politics and populist campaigns to win elections. The election of Rodrigo Duterte to the Philippine presidency in 2016 signaled the return of a nationalist populist narrative, first articulated by Erap Estrada in 1998. Duterte's unorthodox campaign style has captured the imagination of the Filipino voters. His political backstory runs parallel with the archetypical Filipino populist ousted President Estrada. Their political narratives represent a strain of populism that has emerged as a challenge to the dominant liberal reformist, albeit elitist post-Marcos regime founded by Cory Aquino. However, rather than blaming the poor, I assert that the specter of populist politics will continue to hover over us unless the political elites reform themselves and the system. The Philippine left historically consists of an underground component waging a revolutionary struggle against the state and a multitude of legal organizations. While the traditional left participated in the 1947 elections, it has since shunned elections as an arena for elite politics. In 1987, the left organized the Partido ng Bayan to participate in the congressional and senatorial elections. However, unfamiliarity with the electoral terrain and internal debates on the strategic importance of electoral politics resulted in the dismal performance of the PNB. The introduction of the party list election in the 1987 Constitution is an institutional attempt to widen the narrow path to legislative power by providing an opportunity for marginalized sectors and their organizations to be represented in Congress. Significantly, organizations belonging to several left traditions and blocs participated and succeeded in successive party list elections since 1998. Since its inception, the Philippine party list system has been saddled by problems of definition, implementation, and interpretation. A more disturbing trend at the lower house is that party list seats, which was originally intended for the marginalized and underrepresented, is now being populated by political dynasties. The path forward for the country is not to suppress movement politics, but to accommodate their participation and representation towards a grand bargain for democracy, a negotiated political settlement away from armed struggle. From time to time, democratization and decentralization have modestly contributed to the emergence of new political players. Economic expansion and diversification have paved the way for non-elite political players of middle-class professional and entrepreneurial backgrounds to penetrate the political arena. Younger generations from political clans have taken a more modernizing political outlook, although some of them eventually fall to the temptations of patronage politics. What are the prospects for Philippine democracy based on global trends? There have been a global wave of autocratization. For the first time since 2001, autocracies are in the majority. 92 countries, home to 54% of the global population based on the 2020 VDEM Democracy Report. Almost 35% of the world's population live in autocratizing nations, 2.6 billion people. However, the share of countries with substantial pro-democracy mobilization rose from 27% in 2009 to 44% in 2019. The unprecedented degree of mobilization for democracy in light of deepening autocratization is a sign of hope. While pro-autocracy rulers attempt to curtail the space for civil society, millions of citizens have demonstrated their commitment to democracy, a democratic pushback. Despite recent setbacks, there continues to be a constituency for democracy in the Philippines. Close to 8 out of 10 Filipinos are satisfied with the way democracy works, and 6 out of 10 always prefer democracy over dictatorship. The Philippines has a rich democratic tradition that can be nurtured and cultivated to take deep roots. Citizen participation is the critical foundation upon which democracy is built. Political parties, ideally, are vehicles for enabling citizens to engage and reconnect with the institutions and processes of democracy. Citizenship is nurtured on values, knowledge, and practice. Parties can perform an integral function in citizen education, political literacy, and voter education activities as part of their constituency building activities. The challenge for political reformers is to foster greater citizen party linkages by replacing clientelistic accountability with democratic accountability. This can be realized by regulating political dynasties, strengthening political parties, and implementing campaign finance reforms. However, we cannot leave this task to the politicians alone. We must do our part and participate in making democracy truly meaningful for the Filipino people. Thank you very much for your kind attention.